Hello, this is Mark Frangillo, and today we are here to discuss the NESL 1L trial brief issue dealing with non-compete agreements in Florida. I've got a couple of different approaches I wanted to take with you, and I wanted to show you some really good resources, some of which you have never seen before. First and foremost, one of the things that you should be aware of. Your school subscribes to products outside of just Westlaw itself. One of the products you have access to is Practical Law, something that you can access to the window to the upper left. Just click that drop down and we can select Practical Law. You'll always have an ability to get to the other products as well using the icon to the upper right. So either way, I'm going to drill into Practical Law. This is a legal know-how tool that we sell separately to firms. It's actually more popular in firms than Westlaw. And what you will see, every document that we use or every document listed within Practical Law has been written by and is maintained by attorneys who are experts in that particular area of law. So, for example, the issue you're researching, it's a labor and employment issue dealing with restrictive covenants. I can drill into that particular topic, and what it will present to me are all the documents pertaining to that specific issue. Now, obviously, you are interested in Florida materials, so I'm going to just show you and narrow to just Florida materials. And what this gives me are practice notes, which are secondary sources that in 10 or 15 minutes are going to give me or get me up to speed with a particular area of law I've been assigned to research, and actual documents. So if you actually had to draft a non-compete that would comply with Florida law, we have attorneys who will do this for us and give us drafting notes that you should read before proceeding with this type of task. It's just a wonderful way for you to not only learn about the task you've been assigned to research, but you actually get the document that you can download and just simply plug in your client's information once you download it. But what I wanted you to be aware of for the 1L trial brief are the state Q&A documents, because these documents are kind of like secondary sources, and what they will do is give you a high-level overview of non-compete laws in Florida. So we're going to get the standard, we're going to be pointed to the relevant statutes and or cases. Reasonableness of restrictions is one of the elements you're going to be arguing over as part of this particular injunction you're going to be drafting. And you can really get a lot of good research and a good portion of your research done by drilling into Practical Law. Keep in mind, though, that I drilled directly into Practical Law. Practical Law is one of the documents or one of the content categories we will retrieve when we do a global search on Westlaw. I wanted to use this time to highlight it, but if you had just started typing non-compete agreements, Westlaw is going to suggest some potentially good questions and answers. Is an injunction an available remedy for violation of a non-compete agreement? That's essentially what you are researching. So I'm going to select that. Let it take us to the case that best answered that question, or in this instance, cases that best answered that question. But I do want to again highlight that Practical Law is one of the categories that we got. And if you had approached it from this perspective, we get those standard documents that I just told you about, the state Q&As, but you also get something else that we didn't see before, practice notes and this one is dealing with non-disclosure agreements in Florida. So use those types of documents, the practice notes and the state Q&As that I just showed you, to gain background on this particular issue. And honestly, like every other secondary source, you read a couple of secondary sources, and in 20 minutes, you're going to be able to get at least 90% of the content you need to research and write a memo in opposition or in support of this particular issue you've been assigned. Now, while I've been talking, I did drill into secondary sources because, as you should already know, whenever you are beginning to research an issue for the first time, you always want to start with secondary sources and now practical law, now that you know that it exists. And the reason you do that, one, as I said earlier, secondary sources and practical law are going to give me background on an issue I'm unfamiliar with. And two, they're always going to point you to the primary sources that control. Now, when I ran this search, keep in mind, we got 185 secondary sources. As you know, we're not really interested in the national-based secondary sources, i.e. academic law reviews. I'm more interested in the 25 Florida practical or practice area documents. So I'm going to filter by jurisdiction, knocked it down to 25. And again, like I showed you a few minutes ago with the practical law search we ran, we get some really good secondary sources that go to the heart of what you've been assigned to research. So here's one from the Florida Bar Journal, successfully defending employees in non-compete litigation. And keep in mind that as you're going through a secondary source, the footnotes and endnotes, because every document that contains footnotes, we also, for convenience purposes, provide you with the endnotes as well. These items are going to be the important items for you to hyperlink to. So, you get this issue, run a global search like we did, go to practical law, go to secondary sources, and get that background you need, hyperlink into some of the primary sources. And then once you do that, your next step would be to maybe take a look at the relevant cases that we retrieved as a result of this search. Or if we hadn't looked at the statute yet, 542.335, take a look at it now. I mean, we know now that from reading those practical law documents and reading the secondary sources that this particular issue in Florida is governed by statute. That is not always the case in every jurisdiction. So when we run that search, we could have linked to 333.5 from any of those secondary sources, or as I just did from my list, I just linked into 335 right from the statute's content category. Now, okay, great. We're looking at the relevant statute on this particular issue. What is important to me at this point? Well, anytime you're researching statutes, it's obviously important for you to get the actual law, the text of the statute, but just as important, you always want to make sure you get cases that interpreted that law. So on Westlaw, what we would do as a next step after reading the text of the statute, I would certainly want to go into the notes of decisions, and here you'll see that the editors have listed 263 cases. This is curated material. They've listed 263 cases that they thought substantially analyzed this statute. And again, for convenience purposes, what they will then do is group these cases by subject matter. So, if I wanted to make sure that I'm only getting cases that construed this statute with respect to non-compete agreements, I could certainly do that. Preliminary injunctions, I could do that. Legitimate business interests, that's certainly going to be something you argue about as part of this this exercise. So when I click legitimate business interests, here are a handful of cases. Milner's going to be important. Party Light is going to be one that you will be reading. Handful of cases that go to that particular element of non-compete. Specialized training is also something that comes into play. So, from this one statute, I can essentially not only understand the law as it applies in Florida, but I can get every other or a lot of relevant cases on point. Now, at this point, let's say, for argument's sake, I've read some secondary sources and I read the statute and I hyperlinked to some of the cases that were mentioned in those secondary sources and in the notes of decisions. Would I then go and take a look at cases? Yeah, of course. But keep in mind, you probably have already read some of these if you had hyperlinked to them from those secondary sources and from the notes of decisions. But this is a good double check that I've gotten everything that I need. I may have already read a good portion of these, but keep in mind the other thing that I think is important, particularly if you're researching an issue in a jurisdiction that you're unfamiliar with. I want to get cases from the highest authority in Florida. Or in other words, I want to see if the highest authority in Florida has actually spoken on this particular issue. So rather than me going through this list of how many cases, 78 right now, not knowing, is the District Court of Appeal their highest authority? I would guess not, but I'm not sure. The first thing you should always do when looking at a list of cases, filter by jurisdiction, open up Florida, and you'll see that it's going to list the courts in highest order down to the lowest order. So what we see here is there are 6 Supreme Court cases in Florida. That is the highest authority. And I'm going to just filter to those first. Read those first before I rely on any of the other documents. And you'll see that one of them that pops up, White v. Maderi, I could hyperlink into that case. And then another shortcut you should all be using at this point, read the head notes first. The head notes allow you to isolate issues that are relevant for what you've been assigned to research. When I scan through this particular head note, I could see which issues are going to be most important to me from this particular case. And I can tell you that the first 8 really don't come into play. It isn't until I get to head note number 9, issue number 9, and issues number 10. Those are really, really important for me. Head note number 10, for example, talks about what a legitimate business interest is in Florida. Now, let's say for argument's sake, and this is actually such a good case, I'm going to save it to my non-compete research folder. You should always be saving items to folders on Westlaw. I'm going to show you why in a second, because there's a safety net that Westlaw attaches to everything that's in your folder. But let's say that this is such a good head note. This is essentially what I am researching, and I could click on the 10, go into the opinion, And, I can annotate this right now, add a note. This is the standard in Florida. Great, I could copy and use this in my brief. Remember, if you copied this, Westlaw always gives you an ability to copy passages in Allwood format. You'd want to copy in Allwood right now and paste that maybe to your into your document. But I want to go back to the headnote because this is really one of the elements that's going to be key for you to unpack when researching non-compete agreements. And this is such a good point. I want to get every other case in Florida classified or that discusses this issue. Well, if you look on the right-hand side, this issue has been placed in the topic and key number system. That's just that gigantic index of all American case law. It resides in the topic contracts, subtopic 1F, requisites and validity, legality of object, etc., until we get down to that final number. Restraint of trade or competition in general, restriction necessary for protection. This is specifically what we are researching. I'd like to get every case in Florida classified to that minute point of law. One click, and it takes us from the white head note and provides us with a list of every case in Florida classified to that particular point of law. Restraint of trade or competition in general. We got 91 listed in reverse chronological order. Now, it pulled in federal cases from Florida. If you don't want the federal, we could knock it down to 40. Click apply, right? And now we've got a nice collection of cases. And I will tell you that some of these are going to be very important to you as you go through this particular research. What if I didn't want to sort them by date? Here's a real nice feature. If I sort them by most cited, I get the seminal case listed first. So if I'm going to be talking about this specific issue in Florida, I'm going to use the O'Brien case. It's been cited 22 times for that particular point, restriction necessary for protection. That's my best case to use going forward. Okay, almost done. I just have, one more tip that I wanted to take away from today's session, and that is something to do with folders. Now, I told you before that it's always important to save items to folders. It gives me an ability to sort of organize my research. And in using folders, I would recommend saving everything to a folder. Once you are done, I can now select all these items and deliver them. Email, print, download, whatever, Dropbox, Kindle. But there's a secondary reason why you always want to save items to folders. And this is where Westlaw has your back, sort of a safety net, if you will. When you add documents to folders, Westlaw analyzes the issues that are common to each of your documents, and it will break out those issues on the right-hand side. So you'll see for issue number 1, enforceability of restrictive covenant, it is recommending 12 documents that I do not have in my folder. I could actually click this link and you will see those documents listed. It will tell me how many documents in my folder contain that issue. I have 6 documents in my folder that have issue number 1, but it's recommending an additional 12. 2 are statutes and 10 are secondary sources. So it looks like I've gotten all the cases that deal with that issue, but I didn't look at all the secondary sources that go to the heart of that issue. This is a tremendous way for you to, this is called folder analysis. It's a tremendous way for you to ensure you've gotten everything you need on a particular task. I mean, the hardest part about research is when to know when you're done. And this is one way of ensuring that you've gotten everything that you need. Okay, that is all I have for today's session. I hope it was helpful. If you have questions, feel free to email me. My email address is at the top here, mark.frangillo@tr.com. Otherwise, hope it was helpful, and I hope you have a good day. And